The place where I grew up no longer exists, apart from here in the local history library, photographic evidence of Queen Square in Old Trafford. This is where I grew up, and it was demolished in the late 1960s. And in a way, it was like having one's childhood wiped away. In Queen Square, my grandmother occupied the 4th house. We occupied the 5th house. And the 6th house was occupied by my mother's sister and her family. So it was a very strong community, and it was very tight, very solid, and it was also quite happy. Well, there's nothing at Queen Square now. As you can see, everything has just vanished. It's just like the whole thing has been completely erased from the face of the earth. I feel great anger. I feel massive sadness. It's like a complete loss of childhood, because although I've always lived in Manchester, and I've always lived relatively close to here, to this part of Manchester, now, when I pass through here, or even being here today, it's just so foreign to me. And that's quite sad, I think. The old St. Wilfrid's, the school that I went to for many, many years, once stood here. It was pulled down in 1969, which was a great shame because it was a school full of character. It was replaced by this new modern school. I left Hume. I came to live in Stratford on a road called King's Road. I lived there for a very long time. It's quite bland, quite uneventful. There's not really a great deal to say about King's Road. I never had a social life. I never left the house. I just simply sat in and read and watched television and done all the things that in life are generally considered to be quite negative and quite soul-destroying. The only way that I could find any mental relaxation is to simply go out and walk, and to walk around these streets, which can seem quite depressing to most people and seem quite laughably simplistic. But for me, it was perfect fuel, because then I would go home and I would write furiously. And I found that for me, it was a brilliant outlet. It was the thing that helped. But also, you have to have a grain of hope, which is a very difficult thing to have. Now, for the very first time, I'm in a situation where I could leave the North and live in the place of my choice quite comfortably. But do I want to? I don't think I do. It's very difficult to say how things will be in the future, because we tend to change our minds about places. But right now, I don't feel that I want to. I feel quite cemented, and I feel quite attached to all the things that I've known. Why? Who knows? This mystical bond, I really don't know. It's difficult to put it on the table and point at it.
I hate where I come from. Sweat, dust, traffic, congested roads, small jobs, and imprisoning traditions. Everything is available except for opportunities to fulfill my dreams. Even to find a decent job, I had to leave everything behind and run to another city. My hometown failed to make me stay. Now all I can see is a box that limits my dreams.
Good afternoon or good evening, depending on your location. This is Mr. Patriarch. Thanks for joining me today. So today we are going to be talking about home and belonging. This is a topic which was sort of spurred by a little poll I had on Twitter. It was a strike of inspiration, you might say. And yeah, we're going to be using that as sort of a springboard for discussion. I have two guests, Northern Man and Grant, who I don't believe you guys have met Grant before, but he's a fellow Alaskan. And I've been on his podcast, Contra Gentiles, and they're both going to be here soon. Grant, unfortunately, has someone coming to pick up something from him. He's selling some audio equipment. And the guy wanted to pick it up exactly when the stream started. So you should be here any minute. And Northern Man is getting his baby son to go to bed. So he thought he'd be asleep by now. He's not. So he's just struggling with that dad life. Many such cases. I totally get it. But both of them should be joining us here relatively soon. If you're new to the channel, links to support the channel can be found below to Subscribestar, PayPal. You can also find links to grants and Northern Man stuff as well. If you have any questions that you want prioritized or to support the show, super chats, of course, are always appreciated. And with that, we'll begin. So I did a poll on March 28th. And I said, if you could move to somewhere else while maintaining roughly the same standard of living, would you? And the response I got was 65.2% said yes, they would move somewhere else if they could maintain the same standard of living. And 34.8% said no, they would not. And Grant, I think he left a comment. Grant left a comment on the poll where he said, not sure science has invented a measurement of time fast enough to describe how quickly I would do that, presented the opportunity. So Grant is not although he may be an Alaskan, he's not a fellow Alaskan appreciator, you might say, which is a fairly common thing. You know, a lot of people don't really feel invested or cemented in, in this state. It has a fairly transient population, and I think that's part of it. And then I did another poll about same day, and it said, how do you feel about your town and region? Almost 22% said I want out. Almost 29% said I like it. 32% said it's whatever. And only 17.5% said they feel deeply connected to where they come from. So if you sort of add that up, the amount of people who say they want out or it's fine, it's whatever, I don't really feel one way or another about it, was about 54% of respondents. So 54% of respondents either felt indifferent to where they are or just don't like it. And I thought that was interesting and kind of emblematic of the time that we live in. So from here, from Vingul, I could never leave my country, simple as, yeah. Crusader 21, Vingul, same. Even though it's clearly past its prime, it's home. Many such cases. You guys are hobbits, yes. And that's that's kind of for the thumbnail for this video. I chose a still shot from Ralph Bakshi's 1977 cartoon Lord of the Rings. It's a shot of the Shire, and I thought the Shire is kind of emblematic of the general attitude that home appreciators have. So the Shire is, in Tolkien's work, it's a place of not just peace and prosperity, but it's sort of an icon of the romantic vision of home, I think, in a lot of ways. A place where, the roots go deep, right, in terms of a people. So the hobbits who live in the Shire can't imagine living anywhere else. Yes, it's nice and pleasant, but more than that, they've just been there for so long that it'd be hard to leave. And a lot of characters in Lord of the Rings feel this way about their respective homes, right? So the hobbits feel that way about the Shire. Barlaam Butterbur, the innkeep at Bree, when he's kind of sarcastically asked by Aragorn if he's going to go with the hobbits to Mordor, he's like, me leave Bree? He's like, I wouldn't do that for any money. He's like, the very thought of the provincial Barlaman Butterbur leaving his home and going somewhere else was like anathema to him. And then, of course, Boromir is like a man of Gondor, couldn't imagine leaving. Like his duty, his kinship, his lineage is tied to that place. Same with Faramir. He's just loves Gondor, couldn't leave, can't imagine leaving. The dwarves, of course, want to return, return to the Lonely Mountain, return to the Mines of Moria. So although they may, due to circumstance, be kind of traveling or working in different places or whatever, always within them is the desire to return back to their ancestral home. So where they come from is very much part of who they are. And to a certain extent, also the elves. So the elves of, Mirkwood, tied to the forest. Elves of Lothlorien, same thing. These sort of remaining bastions of, the high elves or the the woodland elves in Middle-earth. They do feel attached to their place. However, with the elves, there's the complicating factor that a lot of them also want to go over the sea to the Undying Lands. Now, this is a little bit complicated because on the one hand, they are returning home, right? Because a lot of the Noldor, specifically the High Elves, wanted to return back to where they came from. So they actually do come across from the Undying Lands. But for the other elves, they are basically called to sort of transcend Middle-earth and living in the world apart from, the power of the rings and et cetera, to be to commune in the real world with the divine. And that's sort of what draws them back. Now, this is not at all the case with modern people, I would say, by and large. So we have that shot in the beginning with Morrissey, and he kind of represents this more sort of romantic view of home, this attachment to where you come from, and the fact that home for him is kind of a part of who he is. And he just doesn't really feel like he could, he doesn't feel like he'd be as, it wouldn't be right for him to move to someplace entirely different. And then we have the Indian guy, poor Mr. Haji is not at all satisfied with where he comes from. And he lists a bunch of reasons that, it's kind of a dung heap. It's congested. There's not a lot of opportunity, et cetera, et cetera. And he wants to leave. And many such cases. And this is an attitude a lot of people, regardless of where they come from, I think, view their hometowns. They view them as sleepy, lazy places without a whole lot of opportunity or excitement. And they just love to get away, to get somewhere else, to sort of live their dreams, as it were. Now, I think there's always been a certain aspect to humanity where it has always had these sort of nomadic type of peoples. The peoples who are not tied to a specific place, who do want to go to the city to become tradesmen, merchants, get specific training, whatever. Like, this is not this idea that everyone always just stayed where they were. It's not entirely true. Certainly more do so today than in the past. But there's always been room in society for people who do have certain aspirations or visions of how they want to see their lives, or great deeds they wish to do, or adventure, etc., that they can't simply fulfill by just sort of staying in place where they are. And I think that's normal for a certain amount of people, and it makes sense. But I think what kind of the problem that we see today is that it seems increasingly like everybody is that way. like countries, regions, towns, cities, provinces, states just kind of become economic zones where people can move from place to place, chasing higher rate of return or more excitement, more temporal, let's say, fancies at the expense of being rooted in a place and feeling a connection to a local people. Now, for our two guests tonight, like I said, with Grant, he's a guy who's not particularly fond of where he finds himself. And with Northern Man and myself, we are kind of on the other end of that, I think, to a certain extent. And the other thing too is that both Northern Man and myself have lived abroad for a number of years, and then chose to return with an R, to return back to from whence we came. And I think that experience of living abroad and sort of tasting life sort of on the other side is beneficial in a lot of ways, because it is a good learning experience. It does sort of open your eyes to different ways of being and different, taking advantage, experiencing different things and stuff. And all that's good. But on the other hand, for a certain type of person, it also highlights what you aren't. It highlights modes of being that are not you. And that if you could have the option of, returning and sort of experiencing a more, let's say, traditional life for your specific type of person, then, you'll choose that. So in any case, yeah, shoot, I'm just looking at the time. Grant, this guy's still not here yet. He's still waiting to pick up his stuff. Shucks. In any case, so while we are waiting for them, I'm just going to look through the comments here. Oh, sorry. From Vingul. I rarely even leave my village, so lol. Crossing the border into Sweden in a couple of days, though. Epic journey. Oh, epic. There we go. Gotcha. That's what that means. Yeah. So Vingul clearly is a man of the Shire, not a not a rootless cosmopolitan type. And yeah, no, you love to see it. You love to see it. And I think the other thing too is it really does help if where you live is a nice place, So if there are a lot of, unlike that Indian guy, for example, I wouldn't particularly want to live where he does. And I don't think a lot of people would, for aesthetic and economic reasons. But there are some places where, you do recognize early on how good it is relative to other places. And you sort of cherish that, right? So Vingula seems to be in one of these situations. I myself feel the same way about where I come from. So, from this place where I live in Alaska, I have always felt strongly attached to it. And I think part of that is I have had opportunity to sort of live abroad. But even before then, when I was a kid, there's an aesthetic quality to living up here that I've just always loved. The vast open wilderness, the cold winter air, the cool nights, the eternal sun during the summers. I just love all of that. The cold, clear waters. It's fantastic. And fortunately for where I live, it's not so isolated that it's cut off from, all economic opportunities or anything like that. There is still quite a bit of stuff to do. If not necessarily where I live, certainly, like an hour's drive away, that I can get to. And, if when I feel like going to the city, so to speak, I can do that. But there's just things here that I appreciate and come to sort of take for granted. So, like being able to pee off my back deck and, nobody cares. Just the space, the openness, the wilderness. I love all that stuff. And I recognize that, for much of the country, that is not something that most people can enjoy or participate. Oh, speak of the devil. Grant's here.
1 second. Keep talking.
Okay. So yeah, we were just extolling upon the virtues of the local AK countryside, but we'll get to your takes here in a minute. But how'd it go with the audio transfer of goods?
Good. My laptop is popping my audio out. It's not going through my headphones, so I'm trying to figure out that troubleshooting.
Gotcha.
Sorry for the late entry.
No problem. It's all right. Yeah, stuff comes up, and like I said, Northern Man's trying to get his kid to go to sleep, so he'll be joining us once that's been resolved. I definitely have had that happen on multiple occasions where I'm like, yeah, my kid's going to go to sleep and it'll be great. And then I can do whatever. And then they just don't go to sleep. It's like,
I got it. You can hear me now?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Good deal. So how you been, man?
Pretty good. Making money.
Very good.
Yeah. Well, I had a couple cloud lifters I needed to dump because we upgraded our interface and no longer needed them.
Good deal. Is that for Contra Gentiles?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. So, seeing as I already kind of gave a plug for your stuff, but
thank you.
For the people who don't know, what is Contra Gentiles and what do you do?
It is my podcast / YouTube show. I guess I used to have a spiel I gave. I don't remember it. It's would you agree, metaphysics theology show? Current events ish kind of.
Yeah, it's kind of like a variety show, but with a leaning on the philosophy, metaphysics stuff.
Yeah, just by nature of being nerds.
Yeah, from a Catholic perspective. Yeah, no, it's a great show, and I first heard of you guys on Pete Quinones's show. And then I was like, oh, these guys are from the Northland, just like me. And,
and then I Jeremy lives like 18 minutes from my house.
Yeah. Exactly. So anyways, but when we started the stream, we started off with this clip sort of summing up the two different type of positions. So the first one was this interview with Morrissey from the Smiths, and it was shot in the 80s. Yeah. And he's talking about, how his childhood home, it's been sort of torn down. It's not the same, but on the other hand, he's a man of the North, and he can't really see himself like living somewhere else. It's this sort of mystical quality, this feeling this attachment that he has to sort of where he comes from. And then it pivots from that to this Indian guy from this town somewhere. And he's like, I hate where I come from. He's like, the dust, the heat, there are no economic opportunities. It is terrible. It is a box to keep me in from pursuing my dreams. And then it sort of ends. And I thought those two perspectives, these two little videos sort of set the stage for kind of the two different perspectives that people have on where they come from.
You're Morrissey and I'm the Indian guy.
Yeah. So I'm Morrissey, you're the Indian guy. So I guess to start off with, what don't you like about living here?
In Alaska, I hate snow. I don't hate cold as much as I hate snow. there's something about I have a personality where I very easily feel oppressed by inconvenience, if that makes sense. I don't know if that just is a fancy way of saying lazy or what, but I really don't like that the majority of the year is not a majority. It feels like a majority of the year is characterized by a major oppressive weather inconvenience that I don't have the option of escaping unless I pay hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to leave on vacation. Like nothing makes me angrier than having to go shovel snow. And I mean, like genuinely nothing enrages me faster than having to shovel snow. There isn't another thing for me. that does seem like a little like show me on the doll where the snow touched you a little bit, which would be, I don't know if I need therapy.
Yeah.
Or something, but
therapy for snow. Yeah.
Otherwise, I hate the darkness. I like really it's mainly the snow and the darkness. I don't have a problem with the small town vibe. I kind of if I did end up leaving, that's kind of where I'd imagine myself ending up anyway. It's not necessarily the social culture. I think literally I hate snow and darkness enough to leave, and that's
right.
all. That's all.
That's all it is.
I don't know if there's like an archetypal symbolism about the snow that I interpret as pernicious.
Perhaps
in some way. I don't know.
Yeah, many such cases though. Those are two big things that a lot of people do not like about living up here is the snow and the darkness. So yeah,
I think those are the two things. Like we obviously I don't know how many people out in the valley are military families, but especially
amount of them.
Living in Eagle River, everybody's in the military, and like I get to know a lot of people, and a lot of the time when they move here, and like maybe a guy and his wife and kids move here, and the wife decides that she wants to leave as immediately as possible and never wants to come back, is mostly the darkness.
Yeah.
I don't know if people are genetically predisposed to have a more difficult time regulating their vitamin D levels or what, but I feel like the darkness really kills people, literally. Or what? Because like you don't strike me as someone who has any problem with the darkness. I don't.
No, and I think for me I just kind of accepted it as normal when because I was born and raised here, and I think totally. I think you might have been as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
But how our attitudes on that, I'm not sure how they diverged, but I don't know. I just assumed this was just kind of normal and it's like whatever. And I think part of it too is that for years when I was a kid, every month I'd always go out camping.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's, December and it's getting dark at, 3:30 p.m. or whatever, like I'm still out there doing stuff. I'm like making fires and camping. So like, I don't know, like I just, from an early age, I just sort of immersed myself in the environment and I don't know, just kind of got used to it.
Yeah. And I hated it from probably about the same age.
Yeah.
Like my parents made me do Boy Scouts for like 6 months one year or something, until I, granted my way out of it. And one of the things we did was we did like a deep winter camping thing. It was like get your deep winter survival badge thing or whatever it was. And they took us out. It might have been Hatcher Pass. I don't remember exactly where it was, but we went out and we dug made the little Quincy things, the little snow mound igloos.
Yeah.
And slept in like 14 below weather.
Yep.
And I think that was a formative experience in my hatred of being here. It's like there's, because what Dante's lowest circle of hell is characterized by, it's a frozen wasteland full of demons that are feasting on the entrails of people who can't move because they're frozen, and like anytime I step outside, like right now, it's getting better, but it's like this is the time of year when Dante's lowest circle of hell starts thawing.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a disposition people have where if they make the best of living in Dante's Inferno, and then there's people who are repulsed by the idea of making peace with it. Like, it's a principle thing that I don't want to make peace with it. Like, I don't, because I don't have to. I could go. I have agency to not do it.
Yeah. No, I'm going to see if my internet is strong enough for me to have video on. I didn't have it on because I'm not sure if I'm not worried about face doxing myself, but it's just the problem is with my wireless phone, that's how I get internet. So
just at your place, or you out at the cabin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just at my place. Yeah. So so for me, it was always quite a bit different because, I don't know, like I've always had like romantic notions of adventure and, like the Misty Mountains and like the dwarves and the wilderness and all this sort of stuff. So when I was sort of out,
you were a nerd. That's
yeah. So when I was out in the snow and I'm experiencing, just sort of privation and harsh conditions, I love it.
You're like I'm a wizard. Yeah.
I'm a wizard.
Running around and throwing snowballs and stuff. It's not that there wasn't anything about it in childhood that I didn't like. I mean, there's some, like, I like how quiet it is outside when it's snowy.
Yeah.
Like, that's cool. I like that. There's some frost formations that are beautiful, and I like when you go outside and you're the sheet frost that stands up on end forms on stuff. Like, I think that's beautiful, and I'm fascinated by it. It's not that there's little things I don't like. It's that I don't like that I have to do it. That I am here and I don't have I can't just go outside and sit on the porch for a while in my t-shirt and just hang out. Like, I don't like living somewhere where nature is trying to kill me all the time and I have to.
Yeah. No, I think it's funny you say that. We have a guy at our church I think he came up from Virginia with his wife. He's an older guy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why did you, want to come up to Alaska? He's like, I've always wanted to come up. He's like, I'm a man of extremes. Like, I either want to live in a place that's...
He wants to live in Phoenix, Arizona.
He either wants to live, in like Death Valley or Alaska is like his thing. And I'm like, that's interesting. But for me, and I kind of get that in a certain sense, because I felt it too, like when I lived in Fairbanks, because, for the audience who doesn't know, Fairbanks in the winter is quite a bit colder than South Central.
No, it's literally like Dante's lowest circle of hell. Like,
yeah.
Like, I don't have room to complain, really.
Yeah, it's extreme cold. It's extreme cold, and it gets dark even sooner. And like I'd wake up to go to class, and it's -30 outside, and it's dark. And then by the time I'm done with my class around 3 or whatever, like, it's already almost sundown, and it's just every day. It's it's like that. But there's this weird certain vitality, like sense of being alive that I have in those sorts of environments that I don't get in sort of more human conditions. Yeah. So, and and maybe it's just like the contrast between me and like a dead landscape or something. I don't know. Like maybe people who if we ever colonize the moon or something,
You'd
like
go?
people will feel the same way. No, I
Yeah.
wouldn't go, but people who would go would probably feel similarly. I don't know.
Yeah,
But-
I'm just anytime I'm in a thing like I'm like, this is stupid. What am I doing?
Yeah.
Like I don't like I could be literally anywhere else on Earth, and I'm here.
Yeah. No, I get you. And sort of so for you, it's more certain environmental aspects that sort of make it less than ideal for you, right?
Yeah,
Primarily.
yeah, and I'm someone that like I psychoanalyze everything and make archetypes out of everything. So like I'm like
Yeah.
the suffocating blanket has fallen on me, and and it won't be lifted off of me, and for 7 months, and I'm like,
yeah.
it's just I don't know. I just look at it and I'm like, ugh, this is what suffering looks like.
This is what suffering looks like.
It just doesn't. It doesn't. I don't know.
Gotcha. Well, that sort of makes more sense. So for you, it's literally the environment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I know a ton of people here are like. Like my whole
Gotcha.
family's here. I have no, it's not a social thing that I don't like.
Right.
Like kind of generally white Anglo Midwestern West Coast kind of thing. Like going to Seattle, people don't feel any different than they do here. Like going to Portland, it just kind of feels like the same group of people. Denver, the same thing. It's if it was like a social thing, I'd skip the country. It's not like I'm disgusted by the people I'm around.
Right. So it's not the whole like pop punk, I hate my town, I need to get out of here sort of thing. It's
I've
it's
been
more
there,
of
that. Yeah.
It's more of the actual environment. Okay, yeah. That makes sense.
I hate going outside. Like
I hate going outside.
like, I'd rather I don't.
It's like, how can I
live.
touch grass if there's still snow on it?
I know exactly.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking about that today. That meme, go outside and touch grass, and I look at my front yard and it still has like a foot of snow on it, and I'm like,
oh yeah,
I can't touch grass. Like,
I can't. And I think there's something to that. I think that actually kind of poetically describes how I feel. It's like I want to like go outside and hang out, and not have to like prepare for it.
Yeah, but you can't.
I want to drive. I want to drive the car,
here.
and it's like, got to heat the car up for 25 minutes, and also scrape all the ice off for another 20 minutes. It's like I just want to go to the store. I don't want to. I just want to go somewhere. I don't want to have to like work for it.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. Northern Man, looks like you finally get the lad to go to sleep.
Yeah, it took me ages. He usually goes to sleep at 9, and that was followed by 50 minutes at 10 past 8 trying to get him to go to sleep, but it took me 2 hours. Just proves that a male hand is never as good as a female with these kind of things. It's just not as good.
No, they don't. They don't respond the same way. By the way, I think your mic's a little bit hot.
Sure, let me just change that.
There we go.
Beautiful.
All right, sweet, cool.
Look at the head.
So,
on that
anyways,
beard, dude. Hell yeah. Anyway,
can you hear us, Northern Man? Is your mic working?
How is the volume now? Is it okay?
Yeah, acceptable.
Too high, too low?
No, it's fine. The volume's fine. It's just kind of clipping a little bit or something, but that's okay. So, anyways, with Grant and I were just sort of discussing our issues with sort of where we come from, and with me, like I was saying, it was very. I've just always kind of liked it. But for him, it's more of an environmental thing. So the darkness, the cold, feeling literally oppressed by the environment. Yeah. It's not that he doesn't like the people or he doesn't like the small town thing. It's more of those specific qualities. And for me, I don't know if it's like, I honestly don't know if it's genetic because Like my family's just lived here for a long time.
Yeah.
And whatever it is that they liked about it, they basically stayed, and I like it. And like Grant, there are times during the winter, and I think this especially happens for a lot of older people up here,
Oh yeah.
where they just kind of feel oppressed
Mhm.
by like the long dark winters and the cold. And that's what, I had some great grandparents who left, I don't know, maybe around the year 2000 or so. And then basically one year my Nana was just like, I just can't deal with this anymore. Like I need more heat. So they moved to Nevada. So anyways, but many such cases. And you have the snowbirds. So like the retired boomers who, have a house down in Arizona or something, and then they go down there for a few months. That's also very common. And people take their 2-week Hawaiian vacation over Christmas break or whatever. Like a lot of people do that because of, I think largely because of the environment, but sort of more speaking about general attitudes towards home. Something that I was sort of riffing on trying to fill time while you guys were, were coming in was I was talking about archetypes from fiction. And I think sort of like, I know it's kind of a cliche example, but if you think about Lord of the Rings, the Shire, everybody is kind of rooted in place, regardless of where it is. So, of course, the hobbits, they like the Shire, and the Shire has a lot of great qualities about it. Nice temperate climate, fruitful land, it's peaceful. But sort of more than that, they've just been there for generations, and they feel tied to sort of where they come from, and, can't really see themselves ever leaving. And you have Barlaman Butterbur, the bartender in Bree on their way sort of to Rivendell. And he's like, yeah, I can't ever leave this little, device not connected.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah. You can't imagine sort of ever leaving where he comes from. And then for the other people of, like Boromir, he's a man of Gondor, and he's trying to get back there and sort of serve where he comes from. And the dwarves, even though they move around and whatever for work or whatnot, there's always that urge to return, to go back to the Lonely Mountain, to go back to the Mines of Moria. There's this ancestral connection to home that I think a lot of people just don't have at all in sort of modern society. And I think there's always been room in the past for the person who wants to leave and, go to the city, become, a tradesman or an artist or whatever, become a somebody, as you might put it. That's always happened, but I feel that impulse was always kind of more, more concentrated in sort of a minority of people, whereas now the urge to kind of be more cosmopolitan, to sort of see what's out there in the world and kind of live in it. It's kind of more universalized than it used to be. People are less provincial now, and Americans in particular are weird by like European standards, just because it's extremely common for someone to like grow up in Minnesota, and then they go to college in Texas, and then they get a job in New York, and then they live in New York, and then they retire in, Florida or whatever. Like that's extremely common over here. There's a transient quality to sort of modern life that a lot of people just sort of accept as the norm, when historically that would be extremely odd to sort of, for so many people.
We don't do the like 3 or 4 generations living in the same house thing. It's so common, especially in mainland Europe.
Yeah. And that was something that I noticed as well, when I lived in South Africa. Like multi-generational households are just the norm. And people also, they may move around a little bit, but it's typically within their province. Like they seldom will leave, their small town and go clear across the other side of the country. You do have that a little bit. So some people will go to Johannesburg for work you got a lot of economic refugees coming
Yeah.
from the Eastern Cape to Cape Town, just because the Eastern Cape, is kind of a shithole, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But aside from that, if they can sort of make a living, they tend to kind of stay in areas that are not a million miles away from where they come from, either culturally or geographically even. And nowadays, people are much more fluid and feel less attachment to place. And I think, I'm not exactly sure how to explain that. So, Northern Man, what's your take?
I definitely find in the UK it's more akin to the American style of living, where especially when I was in school, and this might just be a millennial generation thing that's then extended to the generations further down. But I think that you're encouraged to be more aspirational. I made a video on my channel, so I'm not secretive about where I came from. I came from like a small northern steel town, and the steelworks that's like the center of the town, the whole town was built around that steelworks, is basically a shell of its former glory. Just like all British manufacturing, it's been totally destroyed. And even now it's been bought up by the Chinese. So I don't know how long that will last. And because of that, and because of the way that millennial teaching, millennial school life was always teaching you to be aspirational, to keep moving up and try and find the best opportunities, that usually involved moving away. I mean, if you live in a small steel town, obviously most of the opportunities are going to be industrial. And if it's not, then it's going to be some soulless service industry job, like serving checkouts or working in an office. And so I definitely noticed that people will move to cities, and especially if you want to be successful in terms of academia, you'll go to a city, like you'll go to a big northern city, whether that be Leeds or Manchester or York. And if you want to be even more aspirational, you'll go to the more important cities like Birmingham, and Manchester. Sorry, not Manchester, and London, and probably even further south like Warwick, Oxford, Cambridge. And so you'll just leave these places. And once you've gained your degree, there's little incentive for you to return, because you are way overqualified for jobs in small towns now. And you're deeply invested, especially if you spent what now in the UK costs you about £30,000 plus whatever your living cost is. So about 50 grand before you've even entered the majority of your 20s. And you're desperately looking for a job to pay that off now. So you have to go city hunting. And so a lot of the smaller towns in the UK will be filled with, I don't want to berate them, but like low, yeah, they're obviously pensioners, but like say like low IQ white people. Let's say like people who
Bumpkins,
people for whom like a service industry job or working in whatever industry there is left here, working in that. And they get by, they do their job, they go home, they watch telly, and that's their job. And then obviously filled with retirees. And now you're watching as well in these smaller towns, which is weird for me, because where I grew up, there was a small migrant population from Pakistan, but not really anything in the levels of diversity that like you'd expect in any major city in the UK now. But even now there's migrants moving there, and I'm not sure for what job opportunities, other than that they're poaching the service industry jobs from what was the bumpkins that did them. And to meet the same kind of people that I went to university with, you have to go to a city. You have to go to any major population. And that's what you're encouraged to do in the UK. You're basically told, go to the city and earn a job. They don't even encourage you to stick around with your roots, which is kind of disappointing. And maybe I don't want to go hog the mic too much, but I could get into my experience of like what home is later, probably. But it was quite easy for me to move to a city because I didn't have as much attachment to the place as you would probably find with other small town people.
Yeah, no, that sort of makes sense. And I think what you're talking about, this drive, especially in, schools and whatever, for people to just, you must go to college and then you want to have this career. And then, so you're going to need to go to this type of place in order to do that. That's extremely common. I remember there was this, I was listening to this anecdote of this girl she lived in like a small rural village out here, and she was, doing good academically and whatever. And she's getting ready to graduate, and they're asking her, all right, what do you want to do once you're done? And she's like, well, after I'm done with high school, I'd like to get a job at the local post office and hopefully become the branch manager at the local post office. And my mom and my grandma work there, and it'll be really cool. And then her teachers are like, oh my God, like, no. Like, you need to go to college, and then you need to like do like something else, something that isn't, managing a post office branch in your village or whatever. And it was just, to them, like the idea of finding a good, for what her would be a decent local option, and sort of being invested in where she sort of comes from, was just weird to them. Like they couldn't really get why somebody who had, academic potential would want to stay where they are. It was bizarre to their sort of way of thinking.
It's so weird. Oh, sorry to interrupt you.
Okay.
I just wanted to agree with you that, yeah, and it's even the case in the UK now that, like, if you've got small fry aspirations, like, I just want to work in a shop, or I just want to do some honest work for my local community, the teachers in school will basically be like, what is wrong with you? Why do you want to do that? Why don't you want to go and earn hundreds of thousands of pounds in the city?
Yeah. No, that is definitely a thing. And the other aspect of it too is, the idea of career-wise of there's basically zero encouragement for people to sort of strike out on their own, like to become entrepreneurs or business owners. I think probably anywhere. And it does sort of take a specific type of person who wants to do that sort of thing. But, you could say, there's no jobs for me to do X here. But for a lot of places, you could potentially like find a local niche that isn't being filled, do that as, starting your own thing, and then sort of add value to where you come from and still make a decent living. And I think for most people, there's this, and as I've gotten older, this has certainly become more true. The idea that most people have like a dream job that's going to fulfill them is just nonsense. People don't really want a job. Like this whole job as an identity thing is basically retarded. There are very few people who are like, I'm an artist and that's what I'm going to do. And then they just like sink their whole life into it, and they're fine, barely scratching by so long as they can do the thing that sort of gives them fulfillment. People like that. There are people like that who exist, but they are and have always been a very small minority of people. And sort of selling it to the masses that you're just like that is not true at all. Like what people even though they don't realize it, young people, what they don't want a dream job. What they want is a type of life, like, and that's sort of the thing that's missing, like a vision of what your life is going to be, and having the job basically be or the business or the career, whatever, having your career sort of be a way to help facilitate that and then add value to other people, as opposed to sort of being the be all end all of just getting this qualification and then starting this sort of career, I think is one of the things that sort of makes people feel like they have to leave where they come from.
I definitely think that in the UK, there's been a spur to stop people. There's been a disinterest in like small business support, and it is a stereotype in England that most shops, most like small time stores, they're owned by either big chains or they're owned by migrants, by foreigners.
Pakistanis. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a word that I'm not allowed to use on YouTube that we use to refer.
Half of that, the first couple syllables.
Yeah. The first, it's the same thing too in South Africa. Like, I was amazed, like the amount of, it doesn't matter where you are. If you're like in Guguletu, like a black township, or if you're Mitchell's Plain, like a colored area, or if you're in like some Afrikaner town, like out in the veldt or something, all the shop owners are Pakistani somehow.
Yeah, and it must be part of the spirit, but like during the Victorian age, at least, and the early Georgian age, Britain was known as a nation of shopkeepers. So clearly something drove the mentality away from that. I don't know what exactly, but like perhaps you could account it up to, I guess, like boomer aspirational, like, oh, you must always try and succeed as much as possible. You've always got to be the richest, or you've always got to be the biggest. And most small time British stuff. I mean, there is a crying need for it. There's a crying need for it. In the UK now, there's big support for small local businesses like tea shops, like local ice cream parlors. But a lot of my generation has very little interest in doing any of that.
Yeah. And the other thing too, of course, is trades, skilled blue collar work is, I know here in the United States, there's a huge amount of those jobs that are just simply not being filled anymore. Because, if you look at the average age of, electricians or whatever, and they're like Gen Xers and boomers, like young people, a lot of them just aren't going into these jobs, which would pay quite well. And I think for most people, working with their hands is, something that if they tried it, they'd actually find they enjoy it more than, working in an office or at a front desk somewhere. And yeah, it's just not on their radar.
What proportion of the kind of the death of the trades would you place at the feet of like the degree to which equipment is so much more reliable and easily serviceable now?
I'm not sure that that's true, actually. So I've noticed it's become a meme these days as well that that equipment is now, they seem to, I've forgotten what it's like. It's called built-in obsolescence, where stuff's designed to blow up after a while. But I think I would agree with Grant to some extent that actually when these things do blow up, they just replace them wholeheartedly. They don't bother repairing them.
I just think that the cost and effort of installation seems like it'd be a lot easier now than it would have been 50 years ago or more.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But there is money in trade. Mr. Patriarch was saying that that's the case for America.
Mhm.
It's definitely the case in the UK that if you're a good plumber or if you're a good electrician in this country, you can earn a very substantial income to live the middle class life, despite it being a traditional working class job. But people just aren't interested in it. It's known as like, I'd say that it's been vastly stereotyped as an idiot's job, basically. That if you're a plumber or you're an electrician or a boiler fitter, you're this because you weren't academic enough to
It's
go
like
into
the bumbling
work.
oaf character is always like a plumber.
Yeah, it's like
the handyman.
I know that America has a stereotype around blue collar workers, but in the UK it's the same in that like your local plumber or your local electrician is usually a geezer. Like he'll have a strong accent and he won't be very world smart, but not very. He'll be rough spoken.
He'll have your accent.
Yeah, he'll have my accent for sure.
Yeah. No, that's definitely a thing. And yeah, I think so to some extent, a lot of those, it's like with everything. You see the same thing in manufacturing, right? So we need less people to make things than in the past, just because of the labor inputs are now done by machines,
and the proximity of the jobs is much farther now as well, because they're, manufacturing hubs as they exist now were not nearly as prevalent when supply chains were much more difficult to establish and maintain.
Yeah, and they're shorter too. Yeah, so you have you'd have like locally sourced stuff for what you can do, and then you'd bring in the other stuff, and then you'd have like the factory, which is the hub of the town, and then people come in, and then when that goes away or it gets sort of more dispersed, sort of that production process, and then your manufacturing is done in China, and also a lot of the people that would be hired in the factory are also now automated by robots, then that's just going to have a decrease in the total amount of labor demanded for manufacturing. But I still think that for a lot of specific types of jobs that have not been automated, like being a plumber, like being an electrician, like, C-3PO isn't going to come and, fire up your house. I think there still is a lot of, from what I've seen, significant shortage or growing shortages of work in these specific fields. And, I know in this one company that I work for, which kind of does this type of work, sort of blue collar stuff. There's we can't keep up with demand. So a seasonal job that I do, there's no, we do what we can, and then we have like a backlog spilling over into sort of the next year, because there's just not a lot of people doing what we do. And I remember I tried to have a jacket repaired yesterday, take it to a seamstress, and I called them and I'm like, yeah, so we're not taking any orders for stuff for like regular seamstress work until October. I'm like, October? Like you won't be able to fix my jacket until October? And she's like, oh. I'm like, what? What the hell? That's crazy. So, I think there is still opportunities like those which could provide decent livings for people, which are not being taken advantage of, or it's not on their radar. And then as a result, a lot of people who might find, employment doing work like that don't even know it exists. And then so they feel they have to move away to get, to work for Microsoft or whatever. So they go to Seattle, and then they get laid off with all the other tech bros. Like what's happening right now. But yeah, I don't know. It's just it's almost more of a, how do I put it? Almost more of a, it is a material thing, but it's, I'm grappling with concepts now that are like a little too big for me to put into words. They're more abstract. So like Marxist analysis would say, this is the dialectic material process, right? So you have these conditions of labor and capital, and they're changing this way. So this is going to change the social dynamics and et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think that's entirely incorrect. Of course, social changes in economic conditions, ways, means and methods of production, all this sort of stuff does have an impact on changing the incentives for people to leave or to stay in certain places. I certainly would not begrudge someone who lives in a poverty-stricken area to try and seek greener pastures. Like, I get it. However, aside from that, I do think there has been a cultural change in a lot of modern people where they just don't feel, they feel more deracinated, I guess is the right way to put it. Less connected to not just a place, but more than that, sort of like a people, sort of the type of an ethnos. There's less connection to an ethnos, I guess. Sort of a way, a culture, a mode of being that is something they feel affinity for and identify with. And then so they just end up picking up sticks and moving off somewhere. And you see this a little bit too. It's kind of weird to bring up South Africa. It's kind of weird that what you see happening there is kind of this thing where you have a lot of people from these traditional coming from sort of their homelands with these sort of traditional social structures and ways of being, and then they come to the city, and within a couple of generations they're no longer Xhosas from this town or whatever. And with this village structure or whatever, they're entirely uprooted from that, and now they're just black. You know what I mean? So the identity sort of gets boiled down to sort of like a lower common denominator, and there's this weird cultural displacement that happens with a lot of these people. And I think you saw that too in the United States earlier. So what a lot of people will talk about is that you had kind of a lot of ethnic neighborhoods in urban cities in the United States, you know, like Lithuanians or Polish Catholics or Italian Catholics and whatever. And then what ends up happening is the WASP elite basically sees this as a problem. And then so they help facilitate, you know, mass migration from the South, and these parish communities get kind of scattered to the winds, and then they go out to the suburbs. And then within a generation or two, they're no longer Polish Catholics or whatever who live in a certain area and have like a sense of community and centered around like a church and sort of traditional attitudes that they have for their people. Now they're just white guys who happen to be Catholic, if that sort of makes sense. Mm-hmm. So there's a disconnect from, I guess, cultural and ethnos and sort of feeling attached to, I guess, a people and sort of way of being that is kind of what is partially what is fueling this need to sort of leave where you come from. Environmental aspects aside, like we talked about. I don't know. Any thoughts?
I think that a huge part of the reason that people develop attachments to where they're from and to their communities is based in large part on what they feel they provide to their community and like knowing their place in it, obviously. And especially in smaller towns in Europe, talking with people from various places seems like almost more of an issue even than here, because their social structures are much older and are changing more dramatically on a degree level. It used to be, you know, before even a portion of the way through the Industrial Revolution, like you live in a small town, it's like, okay, he's the bread guy, he's the meat guy, he's the furniture guy, he's the candy guy, he's the shoe guy. Like there's like all these different, each person has strong impression and understanding of their place in the community, both economically and socially. And I don't think that people have the opportunity to develop that anymore, because like living in Eagle River, Alaska, where I am, like my options, if I wanted to, you know, really take part in my community on an economic level, it's like, all right, do I want to work at Fred Meyer? Do I want to work at Walmart? Do I want to work at Cars? Do I want to work at the post office? Like that was when Northern Man, or was it Mr. Patriarch? You were talking about the girl who was, or one of you guys was talking about the girl who was castigated for wanting to work in the post office. And it's like, well, in a different time, maybe she'd work at a dressmaker. Maybe she'd work somewhere in the community and provide a tangible service to other people that would be, you know, make a difference and be unique enough for her to understand what she's doing for other people and for other people to understand what she's doing for them. And like the post office is literally like, if you want to live in a small town anywhere in the developed West, like you just have to work at the local branch of the bigger entity as it exists in your locality. Like there are some I work at a physical therapy office, and there's a guy who makes a killer living as like a bicycle technician, and he just works by appointment in this bicycle shop, and he's like the bicycle guy in town. And like that's an example of some like kind of an old school lost style of vocation that people have. And like, yeah, there are small business owners, but it's not the same thing anymore when the vast majority of the products you buy and the services you receive are provided to you by the branch of or like the arm of the corporation that is headquartered 5,000 miles away. And it's like, that would actually be like, if I wanted to stay here, something that would be motivating to me would be like finding a thing to do that I would understand as uniquely purposeful in the community. And I don't see that being an easily achieved goal.
Yeah, it's not so obvious anymore. You know,
you don't, because like, yeah, you're more than the work you do. Like there's obviously, like, especially if you're married and have kids or whatever, like you provide more, you're defined by more than just the work that you do and the services you provide. But like, it's also a massive part of your social interaction in the community is what you're doing. Like that's literally why last names are the way they are. Everybody, like my last name is Cook. Like that's not just a random word somebody made up because it sounded cool. It's like, because I'm descendant of people that cooked food, and it was such a big deal that it became the name of a family tree.
Yeah. And you still like to cook.
Oh, of course. Yeah, it's in my DNA.
Yeah. Follow Grant's Twitter for cook posting.
For food posting is most of what I do now. But I don't know. I think I think that like vocation in a spiritual sense is obviously like marriage or the priesthood. Like that's, but on a more colloquial level, like your vocation is who you are to the community.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want to be Fred Meyer guy in the community. I don't want to be post office guy. Like I don't, like I don't know, I don't know how I don't know if you have thoughts about that, but
Yeah, no, that's
that's truly why I think, you know, in the Northern Man, you're talking about how, you know, Britain is the land of shopkeepers like that. I really think that the English tendency towards cottage industry as a means to make money, like as an economic model, is one of the reasons that I guess until very recently England is one of the most like self-proud people on earth.
Absolutely. And I think that, like you were talking earlier, that the reason why it's become so unappealing now is because you're not known as like, you wouldn't be known as like Grant the shopkeeper. You would be known as Grant the local arm of the neo-corporate establishment that provides this service. And it's become like a very deracinated thing where currently I work in a similar kind of job where I'm kind of in between jobs that I want to do, so I'm just doing a job to make ends meet. And there are people there that have worked 20 to 30 years in this job, and I don't know how they have committed themselves. I work for a big establishment. I'm not going to friggin' dox myself, but I work I work for a big public works establishment. Like this is a huge machine in which millions of pounds of like commercials and public stuff is processed through this place. And I'm the youngest member of staff there, and I'm not a spring chicken. I'm like 30 now. And the people that live there have done this job for 20 or 30 years. They've committed their life to this machine that as soon as they retire is immediately going to forget about them. Like they will, their presence and history in that company, but will be replaced by the next person to come along to work for that arm of the machine. And I understand why that is totally unappealing to members of my generation, especially if I'm not saying you're high IQ, you have to be good at academia, but if you even have two brain cells to rub together to be like, have a little bit of self-awareness and think about your prospective future. I mean, who the heck wants to spend the central mass and meat of their life working for a machine that just will instantly forget about them and replace them?
Yeah. And so I was just in Manchester for a couple weeks in November and December. And that was one of my biggest impressions. Is one of the reasons to me Manchester feels so like Seattle is it is a living, breathing, like it's like a puppet of the machine. And like Seattle used to be extremely cool and soulful, but it is very obviously like a possessed doll moved by the machine now. Like that's
it's not a home anymore. It's an economic zone.
Oh yeah. Manchester's 100%.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Mr. Patriarch. It is not. It's not a city. It's literally a financial zone. Like just like London has basically become a zombie for the parasite that is. I've forgotten the name of it. I was going to say Wall Street, but I'm blanking.
London Stock Exchange, City of London.
Yeah, like the City of London Stock Exchange is basically the parasite that occupies the London city, which is why if you ever go to London, it just feels like a financial zone. And the thing is that what Britain has done to be like, how can we grow out? How can we grow out of the debt that we've amassed from 2008? Is they're like, okay, we need to make more financial parasite zones. So we're going to make one in Manchester and we're going to make one in Birmingham.
Yeah.
And then what we're going to do is spend billions of pounds building this pointless fucking railway that everyone hates called HS2. And like, that for me, the only news story that sticks in my mind about that damned railway, that line, is that they cut down like a 1,000-year-old oak tree. And that was like, Morgoth did a whole video about this, but that is the most symbolic thing I've ever seen of what that train line was. It was just destroying England for finance, basically.
Yeah, because when I think about it, the UK is definitely like the epicenter on Earth for what we're talking about.
Oh yeah, like I agree. The thing is, when we talk about people in our sphere, we talk about the dissident right, and people always hammer on America. They're always like, these damn Americans, they've come all the way across the globe and you've imported your ridiculous ideology to the rest of us.
Yeah.
But as it stands, the real center and meat of global finance is still London. And it's like this post-colonial zombie that just won't die. And as somebody who it's a real like biter for me, because as somebody who grew up like dirt poor and who worked hard to get out of that kind of like getting caught up in the lower class like machine of just like you just get dragged down with it. I worked hard to like get into a position where I'm educated and I've got a fairly decent job, and then to be told I have privilege for a machine that is just a zombie that's killing my country, and I've had nothing to do with this damn thing. And it keeps going. Like the irony of the liberal establishment is as much as it despises the colonial legacy, is more than willing to use the zombie of it for international finance, so long as it makes GDP line go up.
Yeah, no, and that's something that I think doesn't get talked about enough or looked at enough. Is it's easy to blame America for everything, and to some extent, I get it, right? But on the other hand, if you look at the seeds of, I guess kind of globo homo or whatever, there was a transference which occurred kind of after the Second World War, where what was kind of the early globalists, or the proto-globalists, if you want to call it that, were actually kind of based in the UK. And then you ended up having the merger of what is now, you might call, the Anglo-American establishment. So like the city of London and New York and DC and Westminster are all kind of part of the same machine. Yes, America does call the shots on like a lot of the international foreign policy or whatever, but there is a lot of cooperation and alignment of goals between, I guess, on both sides of the Atlantic, in terms of, like I say, the city of London and Westminster kind of being down with whatever's happening in New York and Washington, D.C. Like these are not totally distinct things. Like the UK is not a total satrap of the global American empire. It is a co-creator in a certain sense of what America has become.
In some instances as well, we're like willing bedfellows of the Americans, because we kind of like, I would say there was a collective choice by the British to to give up the mantle of being number one to the Americans, but under the agreement that we would get to join America in the prosperity of the now the single global superpower. I mean, all that it really does on the global stage is just make Britain look like America's whipping boy. But for the vast majority of the post-war like economic boom, the people in charge didn't care because it filled their coffers, and Britain didn't collapse into a third world country.
Yeah. No, and I guess sort of tying this back to kind of home and belonging, this is kind of one of the things that we're up against is in order for people to, I guess, develop these more organic structures, kind of like what Grant was talking about, where you have an identifiable place in the community that you're part of, where it's like Cheers, where people know your name, where you're tied to a locality and people respect sort of what you do there. It's this kind of machine, if you want to call it that, is kind of at odds with that vision, because it's all about, well, I'm not even sure if it's about maximum efficiency anymore. On one hand, it might have been once upon a time about maximum efficiency, but on the other hand, it seems now like they're more interested in just kind of not necessarily even growing for growth's sake, just kind of controlling, not having any part of society which is not managed to a certain extent by these people.
It's become more like ideological and power based now. It's less about like actual tangible money growth and more just about like how much of society can be possibly under the thumb of this thing.
Yeah, that's basically it. It's trying to recreate the Tower of Babel, and I think now in the present age, like if I think about sort of home and belonging, so for me, one of the things, like I always felt connected to sort of where I grew up and came from, and living in South Africa for 5 years really highlighted. There were, of course, a lot of things that I liked about living there. My in-laws, my new friends, all of who were basically, Anglo South Africans. Go figure. But it also highlighted what I'm not, in a way, by like living abroad and sort of living shoulder to shoulder with like very different cultures, and sort of what is sort of my natural way of being, so the way that I see the world. And my friends, my closest friends in South Africa were like small town Anglo South African dudes, and the way in which they sort of lived their lives and sort of saw the world was very similar to mine. And I don't think that was an accident. It's because there is a sort of shared heritage in a certain way, but also generational passed down ways of kind of understanding your sort of place in the world and dealing with sort of the realities of life and sort of how you sort of fit in and what the good life is and sort of what living honorably is and what winning looks like is different for different people. So like culture really is kind of the yardstick by which you measure yourself, I think, is sort of the good way to look at it. So, and for different people, they're going to have different yardsticks. So like winning for like a Chinese guy is going to look different than winning for, a Canadian or whatever, or a Mexican. But that cultural yardstick exists for nonetheless in sort of a relative way for different people. And, you know, living over there, it's sort of, I kind of realized that, you know, I'm, although I could live my life here, you know, over there, I mean, sort of in South Africa, I would never quite feel as at home as if I was back in Alaska. And that was an interesting process. And I think now that I'm actually back here, like, what are the things that keep me here? Of course, there's family, but, and, you know, relative economic opportunity. But more than that, I feel like in this day and age, if you're going to, with all the sort of difficulties that we talked about, the economic difficulties, the social problems and whatever, if you're going to feel really connected to a place and have a real sense of belonging, you really kind of have to work at it and find that sense of belonging. Because in the past, you were born into these social structures, and you know, like I was mentioning earlier, like the Polish Catholic parish community in whatever, you know, Baltimore or something. You know, you were born into this. You have sort of a place in society. You have a cultural sense, and you also have a really integrated wider social network with mutual obligations, which was all centered around faith with the Catholic Church. And for me, you know, it's not so apparent. Like, if I was just born into, you know, Wasilla, Alaska, and I didn't necessarily have like a good family, and I didn't have a great upbringing, and I was kind of didn't have a compass or a religious community to plug in. I was just here by myself. Yeah, it would be extremely alienating and isolating, and not very good at all. And yeah, I would probably be, you know, have a bit of wanderlust and, you know, want to go somewhere else, just to find something, find that sense of purpose, find that sense of belonging. But fortunately for me, with different, you know, because of circumstance and choices and, you know, I would say divine providence, I have found myself in a situation where I do have, I guess, sort of that sense of belonging, that sense of home. Like, this is where I need to be. And a lot of it was not, it didn't come quite so obviously. And, you know, you have to work at it. And for me, you know, getting involved in sort of the church and sort of having that be really, really trying to make that more of a focal point in my life, as not just the worship aspect of it and literally communing with God, but also having that shared experience with other people, which we can sort of unite around, has also been very beneficial. And maintaining those and working to try and sort of maintain those personal and family relationships, I think is a choice that people have to make consciously these days, because it's not the default position for a lot of people. But I think unless you're going to actively resist unless you actively resist the assimilation, you're going to be assimilated, I think is sort of what I'm getting at.
I think I'll go here, Grant, because I'll go for the big black pill, and then maybe you could like polish it off so that it doesn't end on a depressing note. But
sounds good.
I kind of went through the same process as Mr. Patriarch did. It's no secret that I lived in China for a long time. I moved away from the small town that I originally started in because, like I said before, the focal point at that time of that town is dying, the steel industry, and really there's not much of a living to be found around it. It's kind of one of the anomalies that's been created by the Blairist prop up of giving people free money, and there's like a welfare class and that town is dominated by this welfare class. And so for the longest part of my life, I was trying to move away from being part of that community because essentially, and I'm not even kidding, the majority of the people that are in the kind of classes that I was in when I was a kid aspired to just be welfare parasites. They were like, their entire well-being was based on material wealth, and if you can get that for free, then why work for it? And it's weird because perhaps that was to do with like the Blairist Labourite perspective that was created around that time of like welfare living, and I don't know if that still exists now. But I made every effort to try and get out of that community and aspire to something. So I moved out, and I was the first member of my family to go to university, which used to be an accomplishment, but now it's basically admitting that you went to a worldwide indoctrination factory. And so when I moved to China, it was to find prospects. It was to find economic prospects because it was a struggle here to find anything that would be like purposeful work, but also give you enough material to live comfortably. I'm not talking about like owning a middle-class manor, but just getting by. I'm just talking about like getting by. The house prices in this country are astronomical, and the rent is even worse. And so I took the job in China, and then you get especially in a place like China where they have well, now I think it's the kind of right attitude, but they have an attitude towards what people and nationality is, and it's very much tied to the ethnic Han majority and the culture of the ethnic Han. And obviously, you would always feel like an outsider there. It doesn't matter how hard you try, you're never going to be Chinese. The only way that you would ever be Chinese is if you married somebody Chinese, had children with them, and then those children had children with Chinese, so that basically your bloodline was then Chinese at that point. And so in visiting England like a tourist, I was like, oh, well, I kind of wish to go back to England. It's my home. I love the rolling hills. Like, it's built into the English character that the countryside of England kind of imprints it onto the people that live here. You can talk to people like Morgoth, and we absolutely adore the England as a place to be. But when I came back like a year and a half ago, just trying to make like material ends meet to live in this country is so hard. And it's so hard if you're not invested in the system. So if I hadn't have moved away, if I'd have just got into some like soulless job, I would have built up work experience, and people would be more interested in my background. But despite my background being quite high skill, people in the UK aren't really willing to invest in that because you're not shown to, I don't know, that you're not shown to be invested in the long term, perhaps. Or maybe the opportunity, they want to save the opportunities for people who are more invested in the system. Anyway, that aside, coming back, it's a bit more of a shock to see how much England has degraded in the last 5 years, and how much your idea of England doesn't match up to the reality on the ground. I mean, where I lived, it was definitely not a majoritarian Christian society. It was definitely that kind of liberal apathy towards religion, but people had like if you spoke to people day by day, they would confess that they were baptized in the Anglican Church and they believed in God, but they didn't go to church.
Yeah. Spiritual but not
Nowadays,
religious types.
yeah, nowadays, I mean, I live in a Yorkshire. I live near a Yorkshire city. I'm not going to dox myself, but I live near a Yorkshire city, and when I go into work, I have never seen more hijabs in my life. And I lived in a place in China where there was a large Muslim majority, and I've never seen more. It's kind of like, and it is really hard to watch your home die in that kind of way. It's hard to watch, like, when I go into the city that I work in, there is like the heart of it is made of these 100-year-old buildings that were built in the Victorian era. These like glorious cathedrals, and the train station is also Victorian, and all the like inner part of the city is all Victorian. And so you live in like this husk of something that your ancestors spent their sweat and blood building. And it's populated by people who have no connection to these ancestors. They have come here to basically take that wealth and either use it for their own or pretend that it belongs to them. And for that reason, I'm definitely, whereas Mr. Patriarch had the experience that I would prefer to have had, which is that I went to home and I was like, this is great and I can really invest myself in this. I would say that even the Anglo-Saxon people here, like the English indigenous people, they're totally deracinated. They get by with a concoction of like things that dull their senses, whether that be alcohol, whether that be sugar, whether that be nicotine, whether that be weed. And they totally atomize themselves. Like community to them is just their family and like the Britain that's told to them on the television. And it's sad. It's honestly sad, but I'm kind of hoping that reality will change. But for now, I'm not invested much in my own home country. It's kind of like watching a relative with dementia slowly losing what made them a person to you, and all that's really left is like the body of that person, but all the memories and all the things that made that person are gone now, and all that's left is the body.
So
And that is a dark black belt.
Do you know does Scotland have the same issue?
Well, aside from, let's not joke. So I have a brother who moved up to Scotland for a while. He met a Scottish girl and he fell in love with her very deeply, and their relationship is amazing. And so he lived in Scotland for a while, and it's really hilarious the attitude that the Scottish have to the English, because they hate us. They don't want us living there. They're like, piss off back to England and live in your own country.
No.
But they will not transfer that attitude to overseas migrants in their own country, of which they have been totally cucked on. They've been total. They're fully on board with the diversity is our strength.
The thing with Scotland, though, if I understand correctly, is although they think that way, they still only have like
it's still 96% white. It's still 96% white. But
and I think part of that is like people who come to the UK as like economic migrants, essentially. Why would they go to Scotland when they could go to London?
Yeah.
So they just. But if Scotland sort of became independent and then had its own open borders policy, then that would be another option for people to try, and then they could try to get asylum status in Edinburgh or something and London, and then just take whatever happens first.
I think that Scotland is a different beast as well, because Scotland, like, it's hard to find a middle ground in Scotland, because Edinburgh is like this rich, affluent place. you can't just move to Edinburgh if you want to, because the monetary investment you'd need to own a property there is just like the normal person can't do that. And so that prices out economic migrants immediately. But instead of in England, where there was like a lower working class community that economic migrants could get into easily, because it was like a nice enough area, there wasn't too much crime, the houses are reasonably nice, and they used to be cheap. In Scotland, the low class areas are totally undesirable. They're like Glasgow is famous for being like the murder. It used to be the murder capital of Europe. Like, no, but even the whites don't want to move there. So why would the economic migrants want to move there? And so they kind of have a different problem. Like, I feel like the state of their society keeps out economic migrants because they don't want to move to the low class areas, and they can't afford to move to the high class areas. Yeah. And let's say, for example, let's say you're an economic migrant and you're Muslim. Well, there's big established Muslim communities in England, so just move there. If you're a black migrant, let's say you're coming from sub-Saharan Africa, well, there's a massive African community in the south of England, so they just move there. And so I don't think that people are particularly interested in Scotland. That's why it's like retained its place.
Scotland wants to be diverse, but like the migrants have too much sense to move there, basically, is it? Yeah, but with them, it's sort of more of it's less about, I mean, Scotland's a great example of this. Like, Western man is screwed with or without mass migration.
Yeah.
I mean, mass migration like steps on the gas in a certain sense, because now you're like replacing, you're bringing in sort of different modes of being into sort of an environment, and that causes problems, right? You know, we know this, but if you look at a lot of these places like Scotland, it just seems like a soulless place with a soulless people. You know what I mean? Even though they are all, you know, of the same ethnicity, like it's just like the life has gone out of them. And like that sense of, like I said, of belonging, of home, which is tied to purpose, is gone. Like, these people just don't have a purpose. And when you don't have a purpose, your attachments outside of yourself just kind of go away. They become ephemeral.
Yeah, the purpose of the Scottish people has basically become material. Like, there's no there's none of this,
but not even in like a cool way. You know, like it would be one thing if they're like, yeah, we're gonna you know, make Scotland great again. Like, we're going to
everybody's going to make whiskey now.
Yeah, everybody's going to make whiskey now. Yeah, we're going to do all sorts of cool stuff and whatever. Like, they're not even doing that. They're just like existing. You know
it's like, when is your next dopamine hit? Whether that's from like drugs or whether it's from watching Netflix, or, you know, the same kind of deracinated liberal hits. And I'm not sure if that's because that, like, I suppose you could say that the downfall of that is really has been dragged down by the English, because the Scotch national identity was definitely hollowed out, or it took a massive hit when they were forcibly brought into the Union with the United Kingdom. But then they kind of found their own place in the empire as like the hardy Scot, the one who was willing to go to the places that the soft Englishman wasn't. And, you know, Highland troops have a reputation for being like hardy lads, the guys you send in when you can't deal with a people. And despite the fact that they're such a tiny minority on this island, like compared to the England, they're not even a tenth of the population. Like their representation in the British Empire was massive. Like, and think about the Scots lineage in places like Canada. It's a deep thing, but now that they've lost that, now that colonialism has been like totally blacklisted and any attachment to it, I don't know what the purpose of the Scottish people is. For the longest time, it was like, oh, we're gonna drive out and make our own way. We're gonna get rid of these dastardly, perfidious Albion people and go out as like the noble Scot. And then it just turned out that they were going to join the EU and be pathetic and deracinated anyway. So it didn't matter. And anything that was driving Scottish national character has been totally gone. Yeah, I agree with you as well that it's not just. You don't have to be long down the. It's interesting that you use that argument because I've never thought about it like that before, but you're right. You don't have to be so gutted by the liberal machine to be in this state of mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
The funniest part of the whole discussion to me is that like Wales doesn't even cross anybody's mind.
Well, that's because
like the Welsh don't even want to live in Wales. Like.
Wales is such an odd case because they have such a like. I don't know if there was like.
I mean, it seems like they're the last British ethno state, really.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was like a concerted effort by the liberal syphilis to infect these national parties like the SNP and like Plaid Cymru, and even our cousins or even our brethren in Ireland, in Erie, have now had it with Sinn Féin, where all of these previous national parties that like they embodied the character of the nation have just been totally co-opted. They're now they're the party of diversity. The Sinn Féin, the people known for like sponsoring bombing raids on English diaspora people, and now the party inviting millions of third world migrants into Ireland.
Yeah, no, it's funny now that you mentioned Wales, Grant. I'm just looking
because I think I'm actually ethnically mostly Welsh, if I remember right.
Yeah, I do have significant Welsh ancestry.
I'm like a weird case of somebody being mostly one ethnicity.
Okay.
Somehow in the U.S.
Yeah. No, but yeah, me, I'm like if you took a shotgun and like shot it at a map of Northwestern Europe. Yeah. Northwestern for the most part, but and I'm just thinking about my kids. Yeah, it's gonna be crazy. Like shoot a blunderbuss at the world, I guess. We'll be.
Yeah, I'm thinking about how to respond to the black pill.
Yeah, I'm
because I don't know a single person. And I have many friends that live in England and Scotland, and I do not know a single one that isn't like waiting to attend England's funeral like now.
Yeah,
I think that there was at least like there was a collective like white pill when the Queen died, not because they were dancing on her grave for goodness sake, but because it was such like. Well, one, I've never seen whiter crowds in England, hilariously, and I've never seen like a I think AA called it like it proved that the old heart still beats. Like there was still some life in the traditional Britain.
Yeah,
but
it's reverence and respect for this one shared institution that most people still to this day respect, even though a lot of others they don't.
Yeah, but the thing is that like all the joy for that immediately like pissed out into the drain when it turned out that King Charles's coronation had been totally like co-opted by the liberal establishment, and apparently he's going to praise diversity, and apparently now we have to mention Islam in the King's speech, despite him being crowned under. Well, you know, if you ever want to fit, if you ever want a summary of the current situation in England, it was the cathedral, the Anglican cathedral in Manchester, was recently used by the current Mancunians for a Ramadan service, basically. And I never saw like a better analogy of what England is like right now, which is it's like Victorian architecture with this weird people in it that don't really fit where you're like, what? Wait, you guys are here? Like, what are you doing here?
That was the funniest. You go.
Oh, go ahead. And I was just going to say, and then the natives who remain just don't give a shit anymore. Like they've just checked out of life, basically. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah.
That was my biggest impression of the ethnic breakdown of Manchester and its surrounding metropolis was, so I was staying in Salford. And we took a bus north to one of the, the like an estate park, like an old estate that they would, turn into a park, walk around, look at buildings and stuff. And 5 minutes out, everybody's Pakistani. All of the signs are in whatever language, I don't Urdu.
They're either in Arabic or Urdu, yeah.
Yes, every single person. It's like all the school children are wearing hijabs, and it's all like cell phone stores and curry places all the way up.
And the weird thing as well is it's not like these people are just wearing hijabs with like English clothing. No, they've come in like full Pakistani LARP wear. They're wearing like the full robes in
and it's like
freezing cold country.
I leave because we got the bus right next to the stadium that was bombed. So like we're in like Manchester. 5 minutes out, we're in like little Karachi or whatever we want to call it. All the way up, everybody's Pakistani outside the city limits. And then we went to mass at Salford Cathedral, and I was like, we're going to do like the real English thing here. Is like, you go to mass with all these like old English Catholics and stuff. It's like everybody was African.
Yeah.
Like all of every priest was from Ghana. And it's like, which was kind of based and awesome. Like it was cool to get, like homilies by sub-Saharan African badass guys is cool. But like all of the white people were like old working class guys drinking in the pubs, or every gender goblin in the hip part of town. Like if you want to see the white people, you go to the hip part of town and everybody's like a they, them.
Yeah.
No, I think you're highlighting something important. Which is the lack of faith, I think, is inextricably linked to the lack of purpose.
Totally.
And I was just looking at Wales. So Wales, 94% white, 2.9% Asian, 0.9% black, 1.6% mixed. So, and then if you look, so you're like, it's basically like a white ethno state. Like at that point, the numbers should look good. But then the thing is like when you look at the religion, 46.5% no religion.
Yeah.
Like half of and then the other 43.6% professes Christianity. But what does that even mean? Like, I mean, you're a Catholic, right, Northern Man?
Yeah, I'm a Catholic, and I have exactly the same experience of Grant. Like, I go to the cathedral. I don't like my local parish church because it's kind of like the ethnic Catholic church where it's like it's filled with women and children, but there's no men. Like, because obviously dad's at home, he's pissed. He's either pissed from the night before or hungover from it. He doesn't bother. And the women just drag their children to the church because that's what they were told to do. And no doubt they all use like contraception and the stuff that I don't, the kind of central teachings that brought me to Catholicism, I fly in the face. Like, it's basically filled with liberal Catholics. And so I go to the cathedral because it's a bit more based. And it's exactly like Grant was saying. It's filled with Filipinos and Africans who, these people are horrendously based. Like, they're
they're the real Catholics. The real Catholics are all Filipinos and Africans now.
But it's really disassociating because I've been
like, my people are so fucked, basically.
I mean, you literally are from the land of the Anglicans, so it's not shocking that the Catholics are all liberal.
Yeah, I try and I've been thinking about this for the last few months because I've been trying to think about like how you can hold like dissident right central points and still be a Christian. And because obviously the further you get down this rabbit hole, the more you run into the perfidious pagan. And I think it's because you can simultaneously, whereas with Islam and definitely with Buddhism as well, the culture is definitely interlinked with the religion. So if you're Islamic in religion, you're Islamic in culture as well. With Christianity, you can hold to a cultural identity and still be a Christian. You can have
It's literally
things
in the name.
Yeah, you can have like Celtic Christianity, and you can have Nordic Christianity, and you can have Italian Med Christianity. And it's the reason why all churches have a character. If you go to a place like Italy, the churches are different from the places in England, and they're different from the places in Russia. And I've actually forgotten why I brought up this point. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, I think it's weird then to bring in it's weird to then be in a church and be like, oh, you have all the right religious views, but you're not English, so why are you here? Like, what? You're just another economic migrant. You're part of the problem. You're like, despite the fact that we agree on social issues, you're a part of the issue that I have with current society. And it's also one of the issues, I'll finish this briefly, it's one of the things that Turnip Seed brings up that really hits hard for me as a Catholic, because he's like, well, the Catholic Church basically, he says that his accusation against the Catholic Church is that they bring in migrants to boost their numbers. And it's really hard to argue with that when you stand in the most base church in your area and it's full of non-English people.
Yeah. Well, for me, the way I look at it is I don't blame, like, England is screwed because of English people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Is basically what I'd say. In the same way that like Mexico sucks because of Mexicans, but they just suck in different ways. But they suck in different ways is what I'm saying. So with, like the Latin American countries or like the African countries, there's a certain amount of chaos and like virility, which is kind of cool. But on the other hand, it manifests in like certain violent social pathologies or whatever. Whereas in the West, in places like England or, liberal or blue America, let's say, what ends up happening is that the life just gets sucked out of the people. Like all vitality is gone. And then the people encourage and tolerate their own replacement. And then the guy from Nigeria or the Catholic dude from Nigeria or Ghana is like, oh, like you'll let me come here and make 10 times the amount of money that I would in my country? Okay. And then he comes. And I don't blame the Ghanaian for like taking advantage of that deal. I blame the the society, which is totally lost any sense of belief or pride or spiritual center in itself for encouraging that sort of thing to happen. Like it's done it to itself.
Absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Like one of the hardest things going down whether you ascribe to the ethnos, like you were saying, Mr. Patriarch, or not, and whether you think that's like a central tenet of identity, one of the problems that the dissident right has to come to terms with is that the worst enemy of the dissident right has the same ethnos as them. Then majoritively, the worst enemy to the dissident right now are white liberals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. I put out a tweet the other day ago that the most dangerous demographic in America by far, and the most insane, are millennial wine-ons. You know,
Yeah.
like these are the ultimate enemy, and you know, you got to think about what sort of situation led to the.
It's not the first time.
How did this come to pass? And it's I'm going to sound like a broken record, but to me, it always, you know, whether you look at history or you look at where we're living through now, or you look at scripture or whatever, it always comes back to a turn away from God and an embrace of something else, whether it's materialism, worshiping false gods, or whatever, that ends up bringing about a calamity for the civilization, like every time. And I think that's just based, unfortunately, what we're just going to have to live through. I wish we didn't. I wish we lived in the Shire, but you know, that's not our lot in life. We live in the Shire at the end of Return of the King, when Frodo comes back and like Sauron's
It's all
like,
burned down.
Yeah, it's like it's all burned down. And
I agree with you as well, Mr. Patriarch. Just to even buttress that point as well, is that even within the church, there's liberal Catholics and liberal Orthodox. Don't know with the Orthodox, so that's kind of hard to say, but definitely liberal Protestants and liberal Catholics are killing those churches.
Of course.
Yeah. No, and they're yeah.
There's
No
black liberal priests.
No, there's not even a single liberal Catholic Filipino ever.
No, not at all. Yeah, that's my attitude towards, you know, going to mass, and it's all like literal Africans that just walked off the plane. It's like, thank God they're here, because imagine what state the church would be in if they weren't.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing, and it's like, this is where the I guess I have a take issue with the whole nationality above all other things, is like the reason why the immigration is a problem is because of the countries that are facilitating it, and it's not the outsiders. Like, yes, I would prefer not to be demographically replaced or whatever. Yes, I would.
The Filipino government isn't scheming to send all of its citizens.
Yeah, yeah. The Filipino government, Duterte is not like pulling the strings.
The president of Ghana isn't like, we're infiltrating.
Yeah,
no,
infiltrating
the global elite is the president of the Philippines.
Exactly. It's a solution to the problem, right? Like you're saying, it's like it was our own governments that came to the conclusion that the way to solve our economic doom is to import all these people.
Yeah. So we need to make the line go up to fund entitlements, and our people aren't having enough kids, so we'll bring in new ones. So that's been the plan.
It's the reason why in most economic discussions, Japan's always brought up as like, oh, they're doing terribly. They're going to explode at some point. They're having a demographic decrease. They owe all this debt. If you go to Japan, you're on the ground. You're like, what are you talking about? Like, observed reality does not match up with your conclusions. And it's because the Japanese didn't come to the same conclusions. They chose slow shrink.
98.9% Japanese.
Yeah, they chose slow shrink and in long-term prosperity rather than import all these people to solve the problem.
Yep.
And it's why people keep saying, I disagree with people who keep saying that, yes, China does have a big demographic problem coming on the horizon, but I guarantee you the Chinese Communist Party will not take the tactic that you think. If you think the Chinese Communist Party is going to import non-Chinese people, you have never been to China or ever spoke to a Chinese person.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's the way Western countries are trying to deal with it is particular to them, unfortunately, and the result of bad liberal Enlightenment ideas and whatever, and fundamentally rejecting God's law and everything. But it's a crap world out there, regardless. And I guess sort of in closing, what I'll say is, this is kind of the situation we find ourselves in, right? And it's not nice. The Shire is either burned down or being burned down. And sort of, what do you do then? Do you just sort of hunker down and try to, deal with it, or do you flee, or what's the track to take? And for me, anyways, like I've basically kind of decided that whatever is going to happen, unless I have to move, I'll probably just stay here, because I take kind of personal inspiration. This is my patron saint, the one who's based off my name, was a guy who lived in Wales after the I think it was after the collapse of Rome. Anyways, it was a long time ago, but he was in Wales. He was on the periphery, and his life was basically, he was known for speaking the truth, preaching the gospel, but more than that, he also built things. So he planted a bunch of apple trees, and he also fought an Irish pirate. Was one of his things. So he's living in an area where it's not easy going. There's a lot of work to be done. He's got this Irish pirate who's raiding his monastery. So he and some other people, help kill this guy basically. And he helped establish things that would continue on into the future, and lay the seeds for trees that he wouldn't be able to enjoy himself, but hopefully one day the next generation would, and lay some groundwork for, I guess, renewal. It was sort of his thing, and I take inspiration from that, because I look again sort of at this place, and I'm even up here, it is red America, but it's not all good. If you know what I mean. There's a lot of social pathologies, a lot of substance abuse, a lot of hopelessness, a lot of people have just sort of given up on life, and sort of what the future outlook for Alaska is going to be going into the future, as economic conditions and the world changes. I'm not sure, but I do kind of feel, I guess, obligated or called to try to find some way to keep the lights burning, if that makes sense.
You can't turn the sun on.
Yeah, I know.
That would solve the problem.
Yeah. Right. But the flame, keep the flame alive, I guess.
Yeah.
In a poetic sense, because I can't do anything about the sunshine or the lack thereof. But so anyways, yeah, and I guess that's it. And for me, finding that sense of home, that sense of belonging it is irrational to a certain extent. It's more just this mystical feeling that I have, and the connections that I do have, which exist and are substantial, are familial and spiritual, with the church and wherever that I go to, the friends that I have. Mm-hmm. And, I'm thinking about my kids, and, where do I want them to be raised? I want them to be raised here. Why? Because it's my home. That's all. And as a result, I feel like I have to, or I should, find my own small way of making it a better place. So that's it for me. Northern Man, Grant, anything before we close out?
If Grant doesn't have something to say, then I will. Because
Grant's like, I just want more sunshine.
I'm formulating.
Okay, I'll step in and then you can always come in after me.
Yeah.
I know that I dropped a massive black pill in the middle of this stream, and for goodness sake, I did this on Settler's Lament as well, and I feel like I'm just becoming the black pill merchant, which is not my idea in life. Just remember, guys, in the end, he does come back and we all win. But you know, really, if you're in my situation, if you're in Mr. Patriarchs, then fantastic. Embrace the local environment. Try and like buttress that fortress and gatekeep and create, and for goodness sake, have children and build that community. If you're in my situation, then I would say that you need to create the nation that you want to propagate. You need to live the principle first and demonstrate that it's something worthwhile. Rediscover some of your ancestry. Look at the way that your people did things in the past. The reason that I came to the Catholic faith is because I genuinely believe that this is the traditional faith of the Englishman, despite like shredding out all of Anglicanism and also ignoring paganism, because paganism existed before the English kingdom, but it didn't exist afterwards. The English kingdom was created in a Christian idea, and so just these things don't come from nothing. Try and live it out in your life. Do things that are hard, but that are worthwhile doing. For example, I chose a traditional name for my son that seems unusual to English people. They will say, like, where's his name from? It sounds like kind of Nordic. It sounds like Viking. And when I tell them that it's an Anglo-Saxon name, they feel so deracinated because they don't know their own culture. They don't know where they came from. And so you have to kind of teach these morals again. Act like the home that you want isn't so much dead but needs reviving. It needs, like, the fire needs lighting. The embers need some air blowing on them.
Be the England you want to see, basically.
Be the England you want
to see in the world. Yeah, I don't know, because when you talk about ancestry, it's like, to an Alaskan that means literally nothing as far as like geographical location. It's like people did not exist here like 60 years ago. There were like 10 people here before 1970. And like seriously, they're like, what? There were like 50,000 white people in the whole state.
Yeah, no, there were not a lot.
I can buttress that. Like, I could drop a few white pills there and say, like, well, we all know the commandment of honor thy father and thy mother. They made a conscious choice to move to this harsh land and carve out a life for you. And if you're so weak that you can't follow in their footsteps, then you've disowned that command.
I'm definitely a case of both of my grandfathers had midlife crises in the same year and moved here because it was the cheapest option. So like, I'm not, I don't even have that. But like spending time in England and stuff, I started to like feel like I was adopting the fight. If a multi-generational like Chinese guy with a totally Chinese Americanized family went back to China and is like, oh, these are like normal people. Like, this is what people are supposed to be like. I am considering dabbling in a move to England, as much as I understand it sucks there. just to try it out. So we'll see. I might, wherever I go, I might decide that Alaska is actually fantastic and actually not want to pay taxes on anything ever again and then move back. I don't know. I haven't had the formative experience of distance yet, so I don't know if my comments are. I mean, I'll never learn to love snow, but I don't. I might
Maybe
learn
you could
that
learn
everything
to
else
tolerate
about,
it.
yeah, maybe everything about everywhere else is worse than shoveling snow. I'm like, I don't. That could totally happen. I don't know.
All right. Cool. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining me, guys. This has actually been a lot of fun, and yeah, for everyone tuning in, I'm going to put a little timestamp in the comments for when these guys come in, so you guys can get through my riffing and the intro video, trying to fill time. But hopefully, I filled up. Hopefully, I helped center this conversation during my monologue. So, if you guys are new to the channel, please like and subscribe. Links to Grant stuff and Northern Man stuff are found below in the comments. As far as new stuff coming on the channel, I don't know. I'll do something sometime soon. Maybe I'll release another chapter on the Reflections of a Russian Statesman. And yeah, that's about it for me. Grant, shill contra gentiles.
We will actually. What time is it now? We'll be streaming in about 2 hours on Contra Gentiles YouTube channel.
Sweet.
The audio will follow onto the podcast stream or podcast feed. Most people do listen to the podcast, which I guess is on everything, Apple, Spotify, whatever. Mm-hmm. Other than that, nothing. I got nothing else going on.
Sweet. Yeah, no, and if you guys have not checked out Contra Gentiles, I would
We
definitely
did. You did come on for probably one of the most insightful conversations we've had we had probably what was probably the most ecumenically friendly Catholic versus Eastern Orthodox discourse that's occurred in the last several years.
Yeah.
Very good time.
And I'm just looking at the comments, and like there's already a little bit of
infighting
versus Orthodox.
Yeah, I know. That's what we do. We stopped picking on Protestants for a little bit and got the Orthodox guy on. It was
but no, it was a lot of fun. And,
it's worth watching or listening to.
Yeah, I had a really good time hanging out with Grant and Jeremy, and I would love to come on again. So I'm sure I'll probably be on.
I mean, you live like 20 minutes away from me, but
yeah.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. Northern Man.
Yeah, so I've really been, I've been basket weaving a lot recently, so I'm definitely promoting that angle. Like, try and get involved in the basket weaving community. It really helps you.
Weaving for the.
Oh wait, you like literally basket weave?
No.
What are you?
It's a thing, but it's a thing through AA, and I don't want to dox it, but essentially,
it's like real life meetups, right?
It's real life meetups with like-minded people in our circles, and we meet up and basket weave. And I won't explain what basket weaving is for obvious reasons. But
it's just like hanging out. It can like vary from locality, right?
Yeah, and it's great for building.
It's just like IRL meetups.
It's fantastic because you don't it's all well and good discussing these things with people online. Like I love coming on these streams with Mr. Patriarch. He's like, I feel like over the last year we have a fairly decent like friendship, but like he's not the same as like meeting somebody up in real life because he lives thousands of miles away. When you meet a group of people that are like-minded and you meet them face to face, it kind of makes you feel like you're not just the only madman in the room. You're not mad, like you're realizing that people are just deluding themselves into this situation. Anyway, so I've been doing a lot of basket weaving, but I really want to put out a video soon on a totally different topic about troons in our dissident right sphere because for goodness I honestly, I did not expect this kind of infiltration to happen in our spheres, but I don't understand. I know I don't want that. I don't want to hijack Mr. Patriarch's stream, so I'm not going to go into details. But I want. The problem is we're all like we're all devout Christians here, and obviously our take on this question is there's no debate there, but there is some debate in the DR, and I don't understand why, and that's what I want to do a video about.
Sounds controversial, but fun. I always like it when people say they don't like watching the dumpster fire, the drama. They do. It's just, they like it. Those streams always get the most clicks. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining me, and I'll talk to you next time. Patriarch out.
Bye.